The lighthouse on Grandfather's Island hadn't worked in 20 years, but tonight it was blazing like a beacon straight to hell. Maya clutched her swollen belly as another contraction hit, watching 3 black boats cut through the moonlit waves toward her shore. She'd been on Black Rock Island for only 2 weeks since inheriting it, long enough to discover the hidden laboratory beneath the lighthouse and her grandfather's journal filled with coordinates, formulas, and one terrifying entry. They cannot know what sleeps in the deep. Maya must never come here. But here she was, 8 months pregnant and alone, holding the key to a secret that had gotten her grandfather murdered. The boats were moving faster now. In the lab below, something was humming with an otherworldly energy that made her baby kick violently against her ribs. Her grandfather had been more than just an eccentric marine biologist. He'd been guarding something ancient, something that others would kill for. As the first boat hit the rocky beach, Maya realized she had 2 choices: run and let them claim whatever lay beneath the island, or stand and fight for a legacy she was only beginning to understand. But what exactly had her grandfather died protecting? And why did touching the strange symbols in his lab make her unborn child respond like it recognized them? The contraction passed, leaving her breathless and dizzy. Through the lighthouse's circular window, she could see dark figures emerging from the boats, their movements too coordinated to be casual visitors. Maya pressed her back against the cold stone wall, feeling the baby shift restlessly inside her. 2 weeks ago, she'd thought inheriting Black Rock Island was a gift from beyond the grave, a chance to escape her cheating ex-husband and raise her child somewhere peaceful. She'd been so wrong. The island's only permanent resident, old Henrik at the supply dock, had crossed himself when she'd mentioned her grandfather's name. Dr. Thorne was a good man, he'd whispered, but he meddled with things better left alone. The island, it remembers things from before, ancient things. Maya had dismissed it as local superstition until she'd found the hidden entrance behind the lighthouse's maintenance panel. The spiral staircase descended deep into the bedrock, ending in a laboratory that belonged more to science fiction than marine biology. Computers hummed with mysterious data streams, and tanks filled with bioluminescent samples cast eerie blue shadows on walls, covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. The journal had been waiting on the central desk, her name written in her grandfather's shaky handwriting on the final page. Most entries were scientific observations about deep-sea thermal vents and unusual electromagnetic readings, but the last month of entries told a different story, one of mounting paranoia, coded messages, and growing certainty that they were closing in. The artifacts respond to specific genetic markers, he'd written. Maya's bloodline carries the key. She must never come here, but if something happens to me, she's the only one who can protect what we've found. The consortium believes they can control it, but they don't understand. It's not just a power source. It's alive, and it's been waiting. Another contraction gripped her, stronger this time. Maya bit her lip to keep from crying out, knowing sound would carry in the still night air. The figures were climbing the rocky path toward the lighthouse now, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like searching eyes. She counted at least 8 of them, all moving with military precision. Her phone had no signal. It never did on the island, and the radio in the lighthouse had been mysteriously damaged when she'd arrived. Henrik wouldn't be back with supplies for another week. She was truly alone. The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if responding to her spike of fear. Maya's hand instinctively went to her belly, and she felt something impossible, a warmth spreading from her palm, accompanied by a faint blue glow seeping through her fingers. The same blue glow she'd seen in the laboratory tanks. Whatever her grandfather had discovered, it was already inside her child. Heavy footsteps echoed on the lighthouse stairs below. Maya grabbed the journal and her grandfather's research bag, her mind racing through escape routes. The lighthouse had a service ladder leading to the gallery deck, but climbing it while pregnant would be dangerous. The hidden lab had a second exit. Her grandfather's notes mentioned a tunnel system connecting to the island's old mine shafts. "Dr. Thorne's granddaughter," a voice called from below, cultured and cold. "We know you're here. We've come to discuss your inheritance. There's no need for dramatics." Maya's blood ran cold. They knew exactly who she was. She felt along the wall until her fingers found the symbols her grandfather had carved into the stone. The moment she touched them, the blue glow intensified, and something deep beneath the island responded with a pulse of energy that made the lighthouse shudder. In her womb, the baby moved frantically, as if trying to communicate. The footsteps on the stairs quickened. Maya made her choice. Whatever ancient secret her grandfather had died protecting, she wouldn't let these people claim it. Her child's future, and perhaps the world's, depended on reaching that hidden laboratory. She pressed the activation sequence her grandfather had taught her and watched as the floor panels slid away, revealing the spiral staircase descending into blue-lit darkness. The ferry's engine coughed to life at dawn, belching black smoke into the salt-tinged air. Maya clutched her grandfather's journal against her chest as the boat lurched away from the mainland dock, her other hand instinctively moving to her still flat belly. 6 weeks along, and already this child had changed everything, including her decision to flee to an island she'd never seen. Captain Reeves, weathered as driftwood, hadn't spoken since loading her single suitcase. His silence felt deliberate, weighted with something heavier than mere unfriendliness. When she'd mentioned Grandfather Thorne's name at the harbour office, conversations had stopped mid-sentence. The clerk's hand had actually trembled as he'd stamped her passage papers. Maya followed his gaze to where Sable Island emerged from the morning mist like a sleeping giant. Dense forest crowned its centre, while rocky cliffs dropped into churning waters. No beaches, no gentle welcome, just an austere fortress of stone and pine. "How long since anyone's been to the house?" she asked. Reeves's jaw tightened. "Since the old man died. Nobody goes up there, nobody should." His knuckles whitened on the wheel. "Your grandfather, he was respected. Feared maybe, but you're not him." The warning hung between them as they approached a narrow dock carved into the cliff face. Wooden steps, slick with spray, zigzagged up the rock wall and disappeared into the tree line. Maya's stomach lurched, whether from morning sickness or sudden dread she couldn't tell. Reeves tied off the boat with practiced efficiency, but refused to help unload her bag. "Radio's broken if you need to call out," he said without meeting her eyes. "Happens a lot out here. Storms, you know." She knew he was lying. The climb up the cliff path left her breathless and dizzy. Halfway up, she stopped to rest, one hand braced against the rough bark of a pine tree. The journal's leather binding was warm against her palm, and she found herself thinking about the symbols she'd glimpsed between its pages. Strange, geometric patterns that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. The house materialized through the trees like something from a fever dream. 3 stories of weathered stone and dark timber, with windows that reflected the sky like watching eyes. Gargoyles perched at the corners, their expressions more knowing than grotesque. The architecture was wrong somehow, angles that shouldn't work, proportions that made her head spin. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of filtered sunlight. The furniture stood shrouded in white sheets like ghosts waiting for resurrection. Maya dropped her suitcase in the foyer and wandered through rooms that smelled of old books and something else, something organic and ancient that made her skin crawl. In what must have been her grandfather's study, she found the walls lined with maps. Not just of Sable Island, but of ocean currents, star charts, and geological surveys that meant nothing to her. Red pins marked locations across the globe, connected by lengths of string like a web spanning continents. A photograph on the massive oak desk caught her attention. Her grandfather stood beside a much younger man in what looked like diving gear. Both men wore expressions of barely contained excitement, and between them sat a small object covered by a cloth. Someone had scratched out the other man's face with such violence that the photo was scored nearly through. Maya opened the journal with trembling fingers. The first entries were mundane: weather observations, supply deliveries, maintenance notes. But as she flipped deeper, the handwriting became more erratic, the content stranger. "The tides are wrong again. 3 days early, and the water glows. H. Thinks I'm losing my mind, but I've shown him the calculations. The convergence point is shifting. Found another body on the North Shore. Third this month. They're getting bolder. Must prepare Maya. She doesn't know yet, but the blood doesn't lie. She'll feel the pull when she's ready. God help her. A floorboard creaked overhead. Maya's blood turned to ice. She was alone in the house. She was certain of it. But the sound came again, deliberate and heavy, as if someone was pacing back and forth in the room above. She crept to the base of the staircase, journal clutched to her chest. The sounds stopped the moment her foot touched the first step. The silence that followed was worse than any noise, expectant, watching. Her phone had no signal. Of course it didn't. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Maya realized she was truly alone on an island that had terrified a ferry captain and held secrets that had driven her grandfather to paranoia. The storm Reeves had predicted was rolling in fast, and somewhere in this house or on this island was something worth killing for. The baby fluttered inside her. Impossible at 6 weeks, she knew, but she felt it nonetheless, as if it were trying to warn her. She'd found shipping manifests dating back 30 years, all marked with cryptic codes, archaeological permits that seemed oddly specific about geological surveys in areas that, according to the island maps, contained nothing but dense forest. Most puzzling were the bank statements showing regular payments to something called Meridian Research Institute, payments that had stopped abruptly 6 months before her grandfather's death. Maya's phone buzzed against the wooden desk. Dr. Chen's name appeared on the screen. "How are you settling in?" Dr. Chen's warm voice carried concern. "It's complicated," Maya said, unconsciously placing her hand on her belly. "I found some things that don't make sense. Did my grandfather ever mention his work here? Something called Meridian Research?" The silence stretched too long. When Dr. Chen finally spoke, her voice had changed. "Maya, perhaps you should consider returning to the mainland for a while, at least until after the baby comes. Why won't anyone give me a straight answer about this place?" Maya's frustration boiled over. "The boat captain acted like I was sailing to my death. Mrs. Henley speaks in riddles about guardians and responsibilities, and now you—" "Some knowledge comes with a price," Dr. Chen interrupted quietly. "Your grandfather understood that." The line went dead. Maya stared at her phone, then at the journal lying open before her. She'd managed to decode another entry from the previous night. Artifact's energy readings are off the charts. Meridian's Dr. Voss believes we're close to understanding the quantum displacement properties. But I'm having second thoughts. The locals' stories about the island's hunger seem less like folklore every day. 3 researchers have gone missing in the caves. Voss insists they simply left, but their belongings are still here. I decided to sever ties with Meridian. Some doors shouldn't be opened. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She flipped through more pages, finding increasingly desperate entries about hiding something, about making the island safe again. The final decoded entry made her blood run cold. "They'll come for it eventually. I've done what I can to protect the island, but it won't hold them forever. Whoever inherits this place must understand. The artifact cannot leave the island. Ever. The consequences would be catastrophic." A knock at the front door made her jump. Through the window she saw a sleek speedboat moored at the dock, definitely not Mrs. Henley's weathered fishing vessel. Maya opened the door to find 2 people in expensive outdoor gear. The woman was tall and sharp-featured, with steel-grey hair pulled into a severe bun. The man beside her looked like he'd stepped out of a military recruitment poster. "Ms. Rivera?" The woman extended a manicured hand. "I'm Dr. Patricia Voss from Meridian Research Institute. This is my colleague, Mr. Kane. We were sorry to hear about Harold's passing." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her expression neutral. "I wasn't expecting visitors." "We had an ongoing research partnership with your grandfather," Dr. Voss continued smoothly. "There are some materials that belong to our organization. We'd like to collect them and settle any outstanding obligations." Kane stepped forward slightly, and Maya noticed the bulge under his jacket. Perhaps we could take a look around. We know exactly what we're searching for. I'm afraid that's not possible. This is private property. Dr. Voss's smile never wavered, but her eyes turned glacial. Ms. Rivera, I think you'll find that cooperation serves everyone's interests. Your grandfather may not have explained the full scope of his commitments to you. What kind of commitments? The dangerous kind, Dr. Voss said softly. The island holds something that could revolutionize energy production or destroy entire cities if mishandled. Harold was helping us secure it. Maya's mind raced. And if I refuse? Kane's hand moved closer to his jacket. Refusal isn't really an option. Before anyone could react, the sound of an approaching boat engine cut through the tension. Mrs. Henley's vessel rounded the point, moving faster than Maya had thought possible. Dr. Voss glanced at Kane, who nodded almost imperceptibly. We'll be in touch, Ms. Rivera, very soon. She handed Maya a business card. Think carefully about what your grandfather would have wanted, and what's best for your child. The two visitors departed as quickly as they'd arrived, their speedboat disappearing toward the mainland just as Mrs. Henley tied up at the dock. The older woman climbed the path with surprising speed. They found you faster than I expected, she said grimly. How much do you know? Not enough, Maya admitted, but I'm learning. Mrs. Henley studied her face, then nodded. Good, because they'll be back tonight, and next time they won't ask permission. The morning brought no relief from the previous night's revelations. Maya sat at the kitchen table, her grandfather's journal open beside a steaming cup of coffee that had long since grown cold. The symbols and numbers seemed to mock her, their meaning dancing just beyond comprehension. She'd been awake since 4, trying to decode what felt like a treasure map written in a language she'd never learned. A sharp knock at the front door made her jump, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. Through the window, she could see a weathered pickup truck she didn't recognize, its paint faded by salt air and time. The man standing on her porch looked to be in his 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes that reminded her of her grandfather. He wore a fisherman's sweater despite the warming day, and his smile seemed genuine enough to ease some of her tension. You must be Maya, he said when she opened the door. I'm Thomas Brennan. I was a friend of your grandfather's. She studied his face, searching for any hint of the fear she'd seen in the townspeople. Instead, she found only warmth and what looked like relief. He mentioned you, Thomas continued. Mind if I come in? There are things we need to discuss. Maya hesitated, then stepped aside. Thomas's eyes immediately went to the open journal on the table, and she saw something shift in his expression, urgency mixed with concern. So you found it, he said, settling into the chair across from where she'd been sitting. Good. That means he trusted you enough to make it accessible. Accessible is hardly the word I'd use, Maya said, closing the journal protectively. It's completely incomprehensible. Thomas chuckled, but there was no humor in it. James always did love his puzzles. The encryption was necessary, though. Too many people would kill for what's in those pages. The casual mention of murder made Maya's blood run cold. What exactly is everyone so afraid of? The people in town act like I'm carrying the plague. What kind of something? The kind that governments and corporations wage shadow wars over, Thomas said. The kind that makes people disappear in the middle of the night. Maya felt the baby flutter, as if responding to her spike in anxiety. I think you need to be more specific. The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy blanket. And he never reported it? James was smarter than that. He knew what would happen to this place, to these people, if word got out. Mining operations, government seizures, environmental destruction. He spent years developing a plan to protect it. Maya opened the journal again, the symbols suddenly taking on new significance. This is a map to the deposit. Among other things, James documented everything: geological surveys, mineral compositions, potential extraction methods. But more importantly, he created a legal framework to protect it. treaties with indigenous groups, environmental protections, international law precedents. He was building a fortress of red tape. But someone found out anyway. Thomas nodded grimly. 3 weeks ago, a geology team showed up on the mainland, asking questions about this island. They claimed to be conducting routine coastal surveys, but their equipment was far too sophisticated for basic research. Someone leaked information about James's discovery. Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. Is that why my grandfather died? Was it really a heart attack? Officially, yes. But James was in perfect health when I saw him 2 days before. He was agitated, paranoid, said he'd seen boats circling the island at night, strangers asking questions in town. Thomas's jaw tightened. I think someone got to him before he could implement his protection plan. The room seemed to spin slightly. Maya gripped the edge of the table, trying to process the magnitude of what she'd inherited. Not just an island, but a target painted on her back. Why didn't he just destroy the information? She asked. Because hiding from the truth doesn't make it go away. Those minerals are there, whether we acknowledge them or not. James believed the only way to protect this place was to control how and when they're accessed. He was developing a sustainable extraction method that would benefit the local community while preserving the ecosystem. Maya looked down at her growing belly, then at the journal filled with her grandfather's careful notations. And now that responsibility falls to me. I'm afraid so. But you're not alone in this. James had allies, people who believed in his vision. The question is, are you prepared for what's coming? Before Maya could answer, they both heard it. The distant sound of helicopter rotors approaching across the water. The ferry lurched against the dock with a grinding screech of metal that made Maya's teeth ache. She gripped the rusted railing, her knuckles white as salt spray misted across her face. The island loomed ahead through the morning fog, a dark mass of jagged cliffs and twisted pines that seemed to lean away from something at its center. Captain Hendricks cut the engine, and sudden silence pressed down like a held breath. He wouldn't meet her eyes as he secured the mooring lines, his weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency. 3 other passengers had boarded with her in Port Grimsby, but they'd all found excuses to disembark at the previous stops. Now it was just Maya, her single suitcase, and the oppressive weight of her grandfather's leather journal tucked against her ribs. Tide turns in 4 hours, Hendricks muttered, still not looking at her. Last boat back is tomorrow evening. Maya stepped onto the dock, testing the warped planks beneath her feet. I won't be leaving tomorrow. That finally made him look up. His pale eyes held something between pity and fear. Miss, I don't know what your grandfather told you about this place, but he didn't tell me anything. He's dead. The words came out sharper than she intended. Hendricks flinched and busied himself with the boat's controls. Radio's out more often than not out here. Storms play hell with the signal. You get in trouble. He shrugged, letting the implication hang in the salt air. Maya shouldered her bag and walked toward the shore without looking back. The engine coughed to life behind her, and she listened to the ferry's retreat until the sound faded into the whisper of waves against stone. The path up from the dock was overgrown but clearly defined, worn smooth by decades of use. Whoever had maintained it had stopped caring some time ago. Blackberry vines caught at her jacket, and she had to duck under branches that had fallen across the trail. The baby kicked, a flutter of movement that reminded her why she was here, starting over, building something clean and simple and safe. The first house appeared after a 10-minute climb, a small cottage with peeling blue paint and dark windows. A garden had once flourished in the front yard, but now it was a tangle of weeds and wild roses. Maya knocked on the door, waited, knocked again. No answer. She tried 3 more houses with the same result. Curtains twitched in windows as she approached, but no one came to the doors. By the time she reached what must have been the island's main street, a dirt road lined with a dozen buildings that had seen better decades, she was starting to understand Captain Hendricks' expression. The general store squatted at the road's end like a tired animal. Its hand-painted sign hung crooked, and the screen door gaped open, creaking in the breeze. Maya climbed the steps and peered inside. "Hello?" Movement in the shadows resolved into an elderly woman emerging from behind the counter. She was small and sharp-featured, with steel-grey hair pulled back severely and eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of Maya's appearance. "You're Ezra's granddaughter." It wasn't a question. Maya Chen. I inherited his property. The woman's gaze dropped to Maya's stomach, where her pregnancy was just beginning to show. Something flickered across her weathered face. "I'm Mrs. Blackwood. I run the store." She paused, studying Maya with uncomfortable intensity. "Ezra never mentioned having family. We weren't close." Maya set her suitcase down and pulled out the journal. "I found this among his things. It mentions the island, but most of it's in some kind of code. I was hoping someone here might help me understand what he was working on." Mrs. Blackwood's eyes fixed on the leather-bound book like it was a snake that might strike. She took an involuntary step backward. "Where did you find that?" "His apartment in Seattle, hidden in a wall safe." Maya opened the journal to a random page displaying columns of numbers and symbols interspersed with fragments of text. "See? None of it makes sense to me, but he must have had a reason for—" "Put it away." The woman's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. She glanced toward the windows as if expecting to see someone watching. "Put it away right now." Maya closed the journal, confused by the sudden tension radiating from the older woman. "Mrs. Blackwood, I just want to understand what my grandfather was doing here. The property deed mentions some kind of research station, but I can't find any records of what he was researching. Your grandfather was a good man who asked the wrong questions." Mrs. Blackwood moved to the window and adjusted the curtains, blocking the view from outside. "And that book is why he's dead." The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if responding to Maya's spike of adrenaline. "What do you mean, why he's dead? He had a heart attack." Mrs. Blackwood turned back to her, and in the dim light filtering through the curtains, her face looked ancient and hollow. "Child, there are some inheritances that come with a price, and some secrets that powerful people will kill to protect." The storm hit just after midnight, transforming the gentle lapping of waves into a furious assault against the cliffs. Maya jerked awake as rain hammered the cottage windows, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. The baby had been restless all evening, as if sensing the approaching tempest. Lightning illuminated her bedroom in stark white flashes, and in those brief moments she could see the journal lying open on her nightstand. She'd fallen asleep trying to decode another entry, her grandfather's cryptic symbols swimming before her tired eyes. The partial translation she'd managed still made little sense. The seventh seal weakens with each passing moon. The consortium grows desperate. Elena was right about the bloodline. Elena. The name appeared repeatedly in the later entries, always accompanied by warnings and what seemed like coordinates. Maya had tried cross-referencing them with the island's topographical maps, but nothing matched up perfectly. Thunder crashed overhead, so violent it shook the cottage's foundation. Maya reached for her phone to check the time, but the screen remained black. The storm must have knocked out the power grid. She fumbled for the oil lamp she'd learned to keep beside her bed, a necessity she was still adjusting to after years of city living. As the lamp's warm glow pushed back the darkness, a new sound cut through the storm's chaos. Not thunder this time, but something mechanical, low and rhythmic, like an engine struggling against the wind. Maya's blood ran cold. No boats should be out in weather like this. The locals had warned her that storms in these waters could be deadly, that even experienced fishermen knew better than to venture out when the sky turned that particular shade of black. She wrapped a robe around herself and moved carefully to the living room window, keeping the lamp low. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could see nothing but darkness punctuated by lightning. But the engine sound was getting closer. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. "Trust no one who comes in the night." Moving quickly but quietly, Maya gathered the journal and her grandfather's papers. stuffing them into a waterproof bag she'd found in his study. If someone was coming for what he'd protected, she wouldn't make it easy for them. The engine sound stopped abruptly. Maya held her breath, straining to hear over the storm. Then came the unmistakable crunch of boots on wet gravel, moving up the path toward her cottage. She extinguished the lamp and felt her way through the darkness to the kitchen, where her grandfather had shown her a hidden panel behind the pantry shelves. Her fingers found the concealed latch, and the panel swung inward, revealing a narrow space just large enough for a person to hide. Heavy footsteps approached the front door. Maya squeezed into the hiding space, clutching the waterproof bag to her chest. Through a small gap in the panel, she could see into the living room. The front door exploded inward with a crash that rivaled the thunder. 3 figures in dark clothing swept into the cottage, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. They moved with military precision, spreading out to search the rooms systematically. "She's not here," one of them said, his voice carrying a slight accent Maya couldn't place. "Check the bedroom." "Boat still moored," another replied. "She hasn't left the island." Maya pressed herself deeper into the cramped space, fighting to control her breathing. The baby chose that moment to shift, sending a sharp pain through her side. She bit her lip to keep from making a sound. The men were thorough, overturning furniture and emptying drawers. One of them spoke into a radio. "Cottage is empty. No sign of the journal or the girl." A crackling voice responded, "She's here somewhere. Thermal showed heat signatures 15 minutes ago. Find her." Thermal imaging. They'd been watching her, waiting for the storm to provide cover for their approach. Maya realized with growing terror that these weren't opportunistic thieves or local troublemakers. These were professionals. "Check the study again," the leader commanded. The old man was clever. Look for hidden compartments. As the men moved toward the back of the cottage, Maya heard something that made her heart stop, the faint sound of a boat engine starting up in the distance. Not leaving, arriving. More of them were coming. The radio crackled again. "Secondary team is on the beach. No one gets off this island until we find what we came for." Maya closed her eyes and tried to think. Her grandfather had survived on this island for decades, protecting whatever secret had cost him his daughter and now threatened his granddaughter. There had to be another way. Then she remembered the basement. He'd mentioned it only once, saying the cottage had depths that few suspected. She'd assumed he meant a simple cellar, but what if there was more? The sound of splintering wood came from the study as the men began tearing apart her grandfather's carefully organized sanctuary. The storm that had been threatening all afternoon finally broke as Maya made her way back to the lighthouse. Rain lashed against the windows with violent intensity, and the wind howled through the gaps in the old structure like a wounded animal. She clutched her grandfather's journal against her chest, her mind reeling from what she'd discovered in the hidden chamber beneath the lighthouse. The symbols carved into the stone walls matched perfectly with the ones scattered throughout the journal's pages. More disturbing still was the metal box she'd found, its contents confirming her worst fears. Ancient artifacts, photographs of people she didn't recognize, and documents bearing official seals from governments she'd never heard of. Whatever her grandfather had been protecting, it was far more significant than she'd imagined. Thunder crashed overhead as she settled into the worn leather chair by the fireplace, spreading the journal's contents across the small table. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned to a page she'd marked earlier, one filled with her grandfather, cramped handwriting, and strange diagrams. The encryption was beginning to make sense now that she understood the pattern, and each decoded line sent ice through her veins. "The meridian key must never fall into their hands," she read aloud, her voice barely audible above the storm. "The consequences would be catastrophic. Maya will understand when the time comes. She has the sight, as her grandmother did." The sight. Maya touched her temple reflexively, remembering the strange visions she'd been having since arriving on the island. She'd attributed them to stress and pregnancy hormones, but now she wondered if there was something more. The dreams felt too real, too specific. Faces of people she'd never met, places she'd never been, and always that sense of impending danger. A sudden bang from somewhere below made her freeze. The wind, she told herself, but the sound came again, deliberate and rhythmic. Someone was trying to break in. Maya quickly gathered the journal and papers, stuffing them into the waterproof bag her grandfather had kept them in. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she moved toward the window, staying low and out of sight. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could see dark figures moving along the shoreline. They'd found her. The lighthouse's spiral staircase groaned under her weight as she climbed toward the lamp room at the top. Her grandfather had shown her the emergency protocols during one of her childhood visits, though she'd never imagined she'd need them. Hidden behind a false panel was a radio, old but functional, and an emergency kit containing flares and a pistol. Her fingers fumbled with the radio's controls as the sounds from below grew louder. They were inside now, moving through the lower levels with practiced efficiency. These weren't common thieves or curious locals. They knew exactly what they were looking for. "Mayday, Mayday," she whispered into the radio's microphone. "This is Meridian Island Lighthouse. I need immediate assistance. Armed intruders on the property." Static crackled back at her, but then a voice emerged through the interference. "Maya, is that you?" The voice was familiar, though she couldn't place it immediately. "This is Captain Torres from the mainland Coast Guard. We've been monitoring radio traffic." "Are you hurt?" Relief flooded through her. "Not yet, but they're in the building. I don't know how many." The radio went dead. Maya stared at it in disbelief, turning dials and checking connections, but it remained silent. Below her, footsteps echoed on the metal stairs, getting closer. She grabbed the pistol, checking to make sure it was loaded as her grandfather had taught her years ago. The weight of it felt foreign in her hands, but the alternative was unthinkable. Whatever these people wanted, they'd already killed for it. She had no illusions about what they'd do to her once they had it. The lamp room offered a panoramic view of the island, and Maya could see more figures emerging from boats hidden in the small cove on the island's far side. At least a dozen people, maybe more. This was no random assault. It was a coordinated operation. Lightning illuminated the scene below, and Maya's blood ran cold. Among the figures moving toward the lighthouse, she recognized the man from the photograph in her grandfather's journal, the one marked with a red X and the word danger written in multiple languages. He was supposed to be dead, according to the documents she'd found. Maya moved toward the lamp assembly at the center of the room. Hidden beneath its base was a narrow shaft that led down through the lighthouse's core, ending in a natural cave system that connected to the island's hidden tunnels. It was a desperate escape route, but it was her only chance. As she pried open the concealed entrance, Maya felt her unborn child shift restlessly, as if sensing the danger they were in. The storm hit just after midnight, turning the cottage windows into percussion instruments as rain hammered against the glass. Maya jolted awake, her hand instinctively moving to her belly as thunder crashed overhead. The baby kicked in response, as if sensing her anxiety. She'd fallen asleep at the kitchen table again, surrounded by pages from her grandfather's journal and the strange photograph she'd found hidden in his desk. The encryption was proving more complex than she'd initially thought, layers upon layers of substitutions and symbols that seemed to shift meaning depending on their position on the page. Another flash of lightning illuminated the room, and Maya froze. In that brief moment of harsh white light, she could have sworn she saw a figure standing at the edge of the tree line. She pressed her face to the window, waiting for the next flash, but when it came, the tree line was empty. Her phone buzzed on the table. A text from an unknown number: "Stop digging or join your grandfather." Maya's blood turned to ice. She grabbed the poker from beside the fireplace and checked every lock in the cottage twice. The storm was getting worse, making it impossible to hear anything beyond the wind and rain. Anyone could be out there. She tried calling Dr. Chen, but the call wouldn't connect. The storm must have knocked out the cell tower. The landline was dead too. She was completely cut off. Moving to the back bedroom, Maya pulled the curtains tight and spread the journal pages across the bed. If someone was watching, if they were planning to make a move tonight, she needed to understand what they were after. Her grandfather had died protecting this secret, and now it was her responsibility. Working by lamplight, she focused on a section she'd partially decoded earlier. The symbols were starting to make sense. Her grandfather had used a combination of ancient Greek letters and mathematical notations, probably thinking it would be indecipherable to anyone without his academic background. The artifact arrived September 15th, she whispered, translating as she went. Origin confirmed as Mesopotamian, possibly Sumerian. Age estimated at 4,000 years. Initial tests suggest unusual electromagnetic properties. Maya's pen trembled as she worked through the next passage. Government interest confirmed. Agent Harrison visited today with acquisition papers. Told him the artifact was lost in shipping, must relocate it before they return with a warrant. Agent Harrison. She recognized that name from the papers Dr. Chen had mentioned, one of the men asking questions in town about her grandfather's research. The baby kicked hard, making her gasp. She rubbed her stomach gently, trying to calm both herself and the child. I know, little one. This is all getting very complicated. She continued translating, her heart racing as the implications became clear. Her grandfather hadn't just been an archaeologist. He'd been protecting something of immense historical and apparently strategic value. Something the government wanted badly enough to send agents after. Artifact exhibits properties inconsistent with known materials from the period, she read. Emits low-level electromagnetic radiation. Metal composition includes elements not discovered until the 20th century. Either our dating is wrong, or we're dealing with something that shouldn't exist. A sudden crash from the front of the cottage made Maya jump. She grabbed the poker and crept toward the living room, her heart hammering. The front door was still locked, but the window beside it was open, rain pouring in. She was certain she'd closed all the windows before the storm hit. She backed toward the bedroom, clutching the poker, when she noticed muddy footprints leading from the window to her grandfather's desk. Someone had searched through it, scattering papers across the floor, but they'd been sloppy or rushed. Maya gathered the most important journal pages and stuffed them into a waterproof bag along with the photographs. If they were coming back, she couldn't let them get their hands on the only record of what her grandfather had discovered. Another text appeared on her phone. Last warning. That decided it. Storm or no storm, she wasn't staying here tonight. Maya threw some clothes and supplies into a bag, along with the journal materials. She'd have to take her grandfather's old truck. Her rental car would be too easy to track. As she prepared to leave, one final journal entry caught her eye. The translation made her blood run cold. If something happens to me, the artifact is hidden where only family can find it. Maya will know the place. The seahorse holds the key. The seahorse. Maya's breath caught. When she was 8, her grandfather had shown her a tidal pool where seahorses gathered during summer storms. He'd called it their secret special place and made her promise never to tell anyone about it. Thunder crashed overhead as Maya realized the magnitude of what she'd inherited. Not just an island, but guardianship of something that people would kill for. And now she was the only one who knew where to find it. The storm hit just after midnight, transforming the island into a battleground of wind and rain. Maya pressed herself against the stone walls of the hidden chamber beneath the lighthouse, listening to the chaos above while her fingers traced the cold metal of the device her grandfather had died protecting. The encrypted journal lay open beside her, its final pages finally decoded thanks to the brass key she'd found in his desk. The truth was more terrifying than she'd imagined. The device wasn't just valuable, it was a prototype quantum processor capable of breaking any encryption in existence. Governments, corporations, and criminal organizations had all tried to acquire it. Her grandfather had stolen it from a black site facility 30 years ago, understanding that in the wrong hands it could topple financial systems, compromise national security, and destroy lives. Thunder crashed overhead, but Maya heard something else beneath it. The distant rumble of boat engines. They were coming despite the storm, just as the journal had warned they would. Her grandfather's final entry spoke of contingency plans, of people who would never stop hunting for what he'd hidden. She struggled to her feet, one hand supporting her growing belly, the other clutching the device. According to the journal, there was another exit from the chamber, a tunnel that led to a concealed dock on the island's north shore. But first, she had to activate the failsafe. The lighthouse keeper, Thomas, had left her a radio before disappearing into the storm to prepare defenses. She'd thought he was being dramatic, but now she understood. He'd known this day would come. They all had. The entire community of islanders who'd sworn an oath to her grandfather. Maya found the hidden panel her grandfather had described, revealing a complex array of switches and displays. The instructions were clear. If the island was compromised, the device could be remotely destroyed, ensuring it never fell into the wrong hands. But doing so would also eliminate the one thing that might protect her child's future. The radio crackled to life. "Maya, can you hear me?" Thomas's voice was barely audible over the static. "They've landed 3 boats, military-grade equipment. You need to get to the tunnel now." She grabbed the radio. "How many?" "At least 20. Professional mercenaries by the look of them. They're moving toward the lighthouse." Maya's hands shook as she gathered the journal and device. Her grandfather had lived with this burden for 3 decades, always looking over his shoulder, always ready to run. She wouldn't let her child inherit the same fate. The tunnel entrance was concealed behind a bookshelf that swung inward with surprising ease. Cool, damp air rushed out, carrying the scent of seawater and decades of secrets. Maya grabbed a flashlight from the emergency supplies her grandfather had stockpiled and began her descent into darkness. The tunnel was narrow but well-maintained, carved directly through the island's bedrock. Emergency lighting flickered on as she moved, powered by the same geothermal system that heated the lighthouse. Her grandfather had thought of everything. Behind her, she heard the first explosions. They weren't being subtle about their approach. The lighthouse's heavy door wouldn't hold them long. The tunnel curved downward, following the island's natural contours. Maya's breathing grew labored as she hurried through the passage, the device's weight seeming to increase with each step. The baby kicked, as if sensing her distress, and she paused to rest against the tunnel wall. "It's okay," she whispered, both to her unborn child and to herself. "We're going to be okay." The radio crackled again. "Maya, they've breached the lighthouse. The chamber's hidden entrance won't fool them for long." "Where are you?" "In the tunnel. Almost to the dock." "Good. There's a boat waiting, small but seaworthy. Head for the mainland and contact the number in your grandfather's journal. Tell them the Eagle has landed." "What about you? What about the others?" Silence stretched for long moments before Thomas replied. "We knew the risks when we took the oath. Just make sure his sacrifice meant something." The tunnel opened into a natural cave where waves lapped against a hidden dock. A small motorboat bobbed in the choppy water, its engine already running. Maya could see lights in the distance, the mainland, safety, a chance to disappear and start over. But as she stepped toward the boat, footsteps echoed from the tunnel behind her. They'd found the entrance faster than expected. Maya clutched the device tighter and made her choice. She wouldn't run anymore. Her grandfather had spent 30 years hiding, and it had only delayed the inevitable. A child deserved better than a life in the shadows. She turned away from the boat and toward the cave's rear wall, where her grandfather's final secret waited, one that even his journal hadn't fully revealed. The motorboat's engine cut through the pre-dawn darkness like a knife, its wake barely visible in the moonless night. Maya crouched behind a stack of supply crates on the dock, her grandfather's journal pressed against her chest, watching as 3 figures in dark clothing secured their vessel to the far pier. They moved with military precision, their boots silent against the weathered planks. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she recognized the lead figure's distinctive limp. Victor Kozlov had found her. The encrypted pages she'd finally decoded last night burned in her memory. The island wasn't just hiding artifacts. It was concealing an entire underground laboratory where her grandfather had been developing something called Project Meridian, something that could reshape the fundamental understanding of human consciousness, according to his notes. Something worth killing for. The three men split up, two heading toward the main path while Kozlov approached the cottage. Maya's breath caught as she realized her mistake. She'd left lights on inside, a dead giveaway that someone was home. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, where her child grew, innocent of the danger surrounding them both. She had to reach the laboratory before they did. Moving carefully around the dock's perimeter, Maya slipped into the tree line and began making her way toward the coordinates her grandfather had hidden within his journal's margin notes. The forest seemed alive with shadows, every branch and leaf conspiring to betray her location. Behind her, she heard the cottage door splinter open, followed by Kozlov's sharp curse in Russian. The laboratory entrance was exactly where the coordinates indicated, hidden beneath a moss-covered boulder near the island's eastern cliff. Maya's fingers found the concealed biometric scanner, and she pressed her thumb against it, praying her grandfather had programmed her genetic signature into the system before his death. The scanner flashed green, and the boulder shifted with a mechanical whir, revealing a staircase descending into blue-lit depths. Maya had barely made it halfway down when she heard footsteps above. They'd found the entrance faster than she'd hoped. The laboratory stretched before her, a pristine underground facility that looked like it belonged in a science fiction film rather than beneath a remote island. Banks of computers lined the walls, their screens displaying complex neural mapping patterns and brainwave analyses, but it was the center of the room that made her gasp. A chair sat surrounded by an array of sophisticated equipment, all of it connected to a large cylindrical chamber filled with an iridescent fluid. Floating within the chamber was what appeared to be a human brain, but as Maya stepped closer, she realized it was something far more complex, a hybrid of organic tissue and advanced circuitry pulsing with its own internal light. Her grandfather's final journal entry echoed in her mind. The consciousness transfer is complete. What we've created could grant immortality, but in the wrong hands it could enslave humanity itself. Maya must choose, preserve or destroy. The sound of boots on metal stairs jolted her back to reality. Kozlov's voice echoed down the stairwell, speaking rapidly into a radio device. "Da, we've found it. Prepare the extraction team." Maya's eyes darted around the laboratory, searching for options. Near the back wall, she spotted what appeared to be an emergency protocol station, its red warning lights blinking ominously. Her grandfather's voice seemed to whisper from memory, "Every creation should have a fail-safe." She ran toward the station as Kozlov appeared at the bottom of the stairs, his weapon drawn. "Dr. Chen, how thoughtful of you to lead us directly to our prize." His accent made her name sound like a curse. "Step away from the controls." "You don't understand what this is," Maya said, her hand hovering over the emergency activation switch. "This isn't just some weapon or technology you can sell. It's the culmination of decades of consciousness research. It could revolutionize medicine, help people with brain injuries, extend human life, or it could allow us to extract and store the memories and knowledge of anyone we choose." Kozlov interrupted, stepping closer. "Imagine the possibilities. No secret would be safe, no information beyond our reach. Your grandfather was a visionary, but he lacked our ambition." Maya's fingers closed around the switch. He also understood responsibility. Kozlov raised his weapon. "Move away, or I'll take what we need from your corpse." In that moment, Maya understood her grandfather's final choice. Some knowledge was too dangerous to exist, regardless of its potential benefits. Some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. She met Kozlov's eyes with steady determination. "My grandfather spent his life protecting people. I won't let you pervert his work." Before he could fire, Maya yanked the emergency switch down with all her strength. Alarms shrieked through the laboratory as the chamber began to drain and the computers initiated their destruction protocols. Kozlov lunged forward, but it was too late. The failsafe had already begun its irreversible sequence. The race against time had just become a race for survival. The storm had passed, leaving the island dripping and gleaming under the morning sun. Maya stood at her grandfather's desk, the decoded journal pages spread before her like pieces of a puzzle she was finally beginning to understand. Her baby stirred restlessly, as if sensing her mounting anxiety. The lighthouse wasn't just a beacon for ships. It was a guardian, protecting something far more valuable than she'd ever imagined. According to her grandfather's meticulous notes, the island sat atop a vast network of underwater caves containing what he called the archive. Centuries of accumulated knowledge, artifacts and secrets that powerful organizations would kill to possess. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Elena stood in the doorway, her weathered face grave. "They're coming back," she said simply. Thomas spotted 3 boats on the horizon, moving this way. Maya's blood chilled. "How long do we have?" "Maybe an hour, if the tide stays low." Maya gathered the journal pages with trembling hands. "Elena, I need to understand what my grandfather was protecting. The journal mentions coordinates beneath the lighthouse. The entrance to the deep caves." Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "Your grandfather made me promise never to speak of it unless—" She gestured helplessly at the approaching boats. "Show me." "Your grandfather gave this to me 20 years ago," she said, fitting the key into the lock. "Said if anything ever happened to him, if the wrong people came looking, I should bring his heir here." The door opened with a grinding protest, revealing a spiral staircase carved directly into the living rock. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Maya followed Elena down into the depths, one hand on the rail and the other protectively covering her belly. The staircase ended in a vast underground chamber that took Maya's breath away. The walls were lined with climate-controlled cases containing artifacts, documents and objects she couldn't begin to identify. Computer servers hummed quietly in specially constructed alcoves, their blue lights blinking like stars in the darkness. "This is what they want," Elena said, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Knowledge that could topple governments, expose conspiracies, reveal secrets that powerful people have spent fortunes to hide." Maya moved deeper into the chamber, awestruck. Ancient scrolls sat next to hard drives. Medieval artifacts shared space with cutting-edge technology. It was a repository of human secrets spanning millennia. "How did my grandfather—" "He inherited it, just as you have. This archive has been protected by guardians for over 300 years. Your family has been its caretakers for the last century." A distant rumble made them both freeze. The boats had arrived. "There's another way out," Elena said urgently, leading Maya toward the far end of the chamber. "A tunnel that leads to the old smugglers' caves on the north shore." "But Maya—" She stopped, gripping the younger woman's arm. "If they take the island, if they breach this place, everything here will be destroyed. Your grandfather built in safeguards." "What kind of safeguards?" Elena's face was pale in the artificial light, the kind that would sink half the island. Above them, Maya could hear voices now, growing closer. Heavy footsteps on the lighthouse stairs. Her grandfather's final journal entry echoed in her mind. Enter Guardian must choose, preserve the archive or preserve themselves. Never both. "There has to be another way," Maya whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. "There is." Elena pressed a small device into Maya's hands. "A distress beacon. There are others like your grandfather, scattered around the world. Other guardians, if you activate this, they'll come. Some will, maybe enough." The sound of splintering wood reached them from above. Maya looked around the vast chamber, at centuries of accumulated secrets, at the legacy her grandfather died protecting. She thought of her unborn child, of the life she'd hoped to build on this remote island. "How long can we hold them off?" Elena smiled grimly. "Long enough, I hope." Maya clutched the beacon, her mind racing. Somewhere above them, dangerous people were searching for the entrance to this place. Soon they would find it. Soon she would have to make the choice her grandfather had written about, the choice every guardian eventually faced. But not yet. Not while there was still hope. She activated the beacon, its small red light beginning to pulse steadily in the darkness. Then she followed Elena toward the tunnel entrance, toward whatever sanctuary the island's northern caves might offer, carrying her grandfather's legacy and her unborn child toward an uncertain future. Behind them, The archive waited in silence, holding its secrets while the storm of human greed raged overhead. "The consortium has been hunting for generations," she read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "They believe the island holds the key to unlimited power, but they don't understand the price. The Guardian's bloodline isn't just a tradition, it's a biological lock. Without us, the island remains dormant. With us." Her voice trailed off as she reached the incomplete sentence. Elena leaned closer, her weathered face grim in the flickering light. "Your grandfather never finished that entry. It was the last thing he wrote before they came for him." Maya's blood ran cold. "They killed him?" "Not directly, but the stress, the constant fear of what would happen if they succeeded." Elena's eyes glistened with unshed tears. He aged 10 years in his final month. His heart couldn't take it. A sharp crack from outside made them both freeze. Maya instinctively placed her hand over her growing belly, feeling the baby shift restlessly as if sensing her fear. Another sound followed, the deliberate crunch of footsteps on gravel. Elena moved with surprising speed for her age, extinguishing the candles with quick, practiced movements. "They're here," she hissed. "The boats we spotted this afternoon. They must have waited for nightfall." Maya's mind raced as darkness enveloped them. Through the lighthouse windows, she could see pinpricks of light moving along the shore like predatory fireflies. "How many?" "Too many." Elena grabbed Maya's arm, guiding her toward the spiral staircase. "There's another way out. Your grandfather showed me in case this day ever came." They climbed in darkness, Elena's sure-footed steps guiding them past the lighthouse lamp to a narrow door Maya had never noticed. It opened onto a maintenance ladder that descended the lighthouse's exterior, hidden from the main path by the structure's curve. As they climbed down, Maya could hear voices carried on the wind, professional, clipped tones coordinating their approach. These weren't treasure hunters or curious explorers. These were soldiers. "The journal," Maya whispered urgently. "We left it." "Copies," Elena breathed back, "hidden throughout the island. Your grandfather was paranoid, but it kept the secrets safe." They reached the ground, and Elena led her along a path Maya didn't recognize, winding between moss-covered rocks toward the island's interior. Behind them, lights flooded the lighthouse as their pursuers discovered the abandoned research. "Dr. Chen," a voice called out, amplified by some kind of speaker system. "We know you're here. We're not here to hurt you or your child. We simply want to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement." Maya almost laughed at the absurdity. She'd read enough of her grandfather's journal to know what happened to people who made arrangements with the consortium. They had a tendency to disappear once their usefulness ended. Elena pulled her into a grove of ancient trees, their gnarled branches forming a natural canopy that blocked out the stars. "There's a cave system ahead," she whispered. "Your grandfather mapped every tunnel. We can lose them in there." But as they approached the cave entrance, Maya felt something she'd never experienced before, a pulling sensation, as if invisible threads connected her to the rock itself. The baby kicked sharply, and suddenly Maya understood with crystalline clarity that they weren't just hiding from their pursuers. They were being drawn to the heart of the island's secret. "Elena," she said, stopping abruptly, "this isn't just a hiding place, is it?" The older woman's silence was answer enough. "The journal mentioned a chamber," Maya continued, pieces clicking together with terrifying precision. "Something about an activation sequence. That's what's down there." "Your grandfather made me promise," Elena said finally. "If the consortium ever came with force, if they brought enough people to search every inch of the island, I was to bring you here, to complete what he started." The sound of breaking branches told them their pursuers were getting closer. Flashlight beams swept the grove, still distant but approaching fast. Maya stared into the cave mouth, feeling that strange pulling sensation intensify. Whatever lay below had been calling to her since she'd arrived on the island. The restless nights, the vivid dreams, the way her body seemed to respond to the very rocks beneath her feet, it all made sense now. "What happens if I go down there?" she asked. Elena's expression was heavy with knowledge and sorrow. "I don't know. Your grandfather never told me that part. He said some knowledge was too dangerous to share until the moment it was needed. A shout echoed from behind them. They'd been spotted. Maya looked back to see figures emerging from the tree line, moving with military precision. She turned toward the cave, her hand pressed protectively over her unborn child, and stepped into the darkness that would either save them all or damn them forever. Her grandfather's final entry had been clear. When they come, the lighthouse holds the only defense. But what defense? She'd searched every inch of the structure and found nothing but rust and shadows. A contraction gripped her, stronger than before, and she gasped, sliding down the wall. The baby was coming, and she was trapped between labor and whatever hell was approaching her shores. Through gritted teeth, she forced herself to focus on the journal's cryptic references to the keeper's burden and the light that guards the deep. The boats had reached the harbor now. Even through the storm, she could hear engines cutting, voices shouting orders. Maya struggled to her feet and climbed the spiral stairs to the lamp room, each step an agony. Her phone had no signal. It never did during storms, and Thomas was somewhere on the mainland, unreachable. At the top of the lighthouse, she found herself surrounded by the massive Fresnel lens that hadn't operated in decades. But as another lightning flash illuminated the room, she noticed something different. The metal housing around the light mechanism bore the same symbols she'd seen in her grandfather's journal, symbols that had seemed like decorative flourishes until now. Below, flashlight beams cut through the darkness, moving up from the harbor toward the house. They'd be here soon, and she still didn't understand what she was supposed to be protecting or how. Another contraction doubled her over, and when she straightened, her hand brushed against one of the symbols. The metal was warm. Heart racing, she traced the symbol with her finger, following the pattern exactly as it appeared in the journal. The lighthouse shuddered, not from the storm, but from something deep within its structure. Ancient gears groaned to life, and the lens began to rotate with a sound like grinding bones. The voices from below had stopped shouting. In the sudden silence between thunder crashes, she heard something far worse, screaming. Maya forced herself to look down at the harbor, and what she saw made her blood freeze. The water around the boats was beginning to churn, not from the storm, but from something rising from the depths. Tentacles, thick as tree trunks and covered in bioluminescent patterns, emerged from the black water. They wrapped around the first boat with casual destruction, dragging it under before the occupants could even attempt escape. The remaining vessels tried to flee, but the thing in the water was faster, hungrier. Maya understood now why her grandfather had been so careful about the journal's encryption, why the locals spoke in whispers about things that should stay sleeping. The lighthouse wasn't just a beacon, it was a summoning device, a way to call up the island's true guardian from whatever abyss it normally inhabited. But the effort of maintaining the light was draining something from her. She could feel her life force being pulled into the mechanism, feeding the ancient compact between her family and the creature below. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. The keeper's burden is passed in blood, and blood is the price of protection. The last boat disappeared beneath the waves with a sound like breaking glass. The tentacles lingered for a moment at the surface before sliding back into the depths, leaving only churning foam and debris. The lighthouse beam began to dim, the lens slowing its rotation until everything fell still. Maya collapsed to her knees, gasping. The immediate threat was gone, but the cost was becoming clear. Each time she used the lighthouse, it would take more from her. Her grandfather had managed it for decades, growing frailer with each activation until it finally killed him. Now the burden was hers, along with the terrible knowledge of what lived in the waters around her new home. Another contraction seized her, stronger than all the others. The baby was coming now, ready or not, and she was alone in a lighthouse that had just saved her life by taking others. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but the real tempest was only beginning. As she struggled down the stairs toward the house, Maya caught sight of a single light on the horizon, another boat, moving cautiously toward the island. The first wave had been defeated, but it was clear this was far from over. The mercenaries moved through the tree line like shadows, their night vision equipment cutting through the darkness. that had been Maya's only ally. She pressed her back against the cavern wall, one hand protectively curved over her belly, the other gripping the flare gun Thomas had pressed into her hands before disappearing into the tunnels to set the charges. "They're in the caves," a voice crackled through a radio somewhere in the forest above. Thermals picking up multiple heat signatures. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. The ancient symbols carved into the stone seemed to pulse with their own inner light, growing brighter as her fear intensified. The island was responding to her emotions, just as her grandfather had warned in his journal. She forced herself to breathe slowly, watching the ethereal glow fade to a manageable shimmer. Footsteps echoed from the main entrance, heavy boots on stone, moving with military precision. Maya counted at least 4 sets, maybe more. She crept deeper into the chamber, following the narrow passage that led to the heart of the island's mystery. The crystalline formation at the chamber's center hummed with energy, its faceted surface reflecting the bioluminescent moss that covered the walls like stars. This was what they'd come for, what her grandfather had died protecting, what generations of her family had kept hidden from the world, the power source that could revolutionize technology or destroy civilization, depending on whose hands controlled it. "Dr. Chen, we know you're in here." The voice belonged to Morrison, the man who'd orchestrated her grandfather's murder. His tone was conversational, almost friendly. "Your grandfather was stubborn too. Look where it got him." Maya bit back the surge of rage. She needed to stay calm, stay focused. Thomas had explained the plan. The charges would collapse the main tunnels, sealing the chamber permanently while they escaped through the underwater passage he'd discovered. All she had to do was wait for his signal. "This doesn't have to end badly for you or your child," Morrison continued, his voice closer now. "We're not unreasonable people. There's enough here to make everyone wealthy beyond imagination." A different voice cut through the darkness, harsh, accented. "Enough talking, find them." The sound of equipment being deployed filled the chamber. Maya heard the whine of machinery powering up, the beep of detection devices. They were systematically sweeping the area. Her hiding spot behind the crystal formation wouldn't conceal her much longer. A hand touched her shoulder, and she nearly cried out before recognizing Thomas's weathered face in the dim light. He put a finger to his lips, then gestured toward a narrow crack in the wall she hadn't noticed before. Water trickled from its edges, the entrance to their escape route. "Charges are set," he whispered, his breath barely audible. "We have maybe 10 minutes." They began moving toward the crack, staying low, using the crystal's bulk to shield them from the approaching lights. Maya's pregnancy made her movements awkward, but Thomas steadied her with a sure hand. They were almost to the opening when a beam of light swept across their position. "There!" The shout echoed off the cavern walls. Automatic weapons fire erupted, bullets sparking off the crystal surface and sending fragments of ancient stone flying. Maya dove for the crack in the wall as Thomas spun around, pulling a pistol from his jacket. His return fire was measured, precise, buying them precious seconds. "Go!" he shouted over the gunfire. "The water passage leads to the old smuggler's cave on the north shore. Follow it all the way through." Maya squeezed into the narrow opening, the rough stone scraping her arms. Behind her, she heard Thomas grunt in pain, followed by the sound of his body hitting the cavern floor. She turned back, but he waved her away with a bloodied hand. "The detonator," he gasped, pulling a small device from his pocket. 30 seconds after I trigger it. Don't look back." Tears streaming down her face, Maya pushed deeper into the passage. The water was knee-deep and shockingly cold, but she forced herself forward. Her grandfather's voice seemed to echo from the journal's pages. The island's guardian must be willing to sacrifice everything to keep its secrets safe. The passage curved sharply, and she could no longer see the light from the main chamber. Behind her, Morrison's voice grew faint as he shouted orders to his men. Then silence. A dull rumble shook the island, starting low and building to a crescendo that made her teeth ache. The ancient engineering that had created these tunnels held firm, but she could hear tons of rock collapsing behind her, sealing the chamber forever. Maya pressed forward through the rising water, one hand trailing along the passage wall for guidance, the other protecting her unborn child. The island's secrets would die with Thomas, but her grandfather's real legacy, the family that would carry on his memory, would survive. The passage ahead curved toward distant starlight and freedom. The emergency radio crackled to life at 3:47 a.m., jolting Maya from restless sleep. Static filled the cottage before a panicked voice broke through. Dr. Chen from the mainland Marine Research Station. "Maya, are you there? Please respond. We're tracking multiple vessels converging on your position. Large ones." She struggled to her feet, her pregnancy making quick movements difficult. Through the window she could see lights on the horizon, not the soft glow of fishing boats, but harsh white beams cutting through the darkness like predatory eyes. "I'm here," she whispered into the radio, afraid to speak too loudly, though she didn't know why. "Listen carefully. Our sonar shows at least 3 ships, maybe more. They're moving in formation, military style. You need to get off that island now." Maya's blood turned to ice. After weeks of studying her grandfather's journal, she'd finally decoded the crucial entries. The treasure everyone was after wasn't gold or artifacts. It was something far more valuable and dangerous. Her grandfather had been protecting a breeding ground for a species thought extinct, creatures whose unique biology held the key to revolutionary medical advances. The pharmaceutical companies hadn't given up. They'd just been planning a larger operation. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly. The baby kicked as if sensing her fear. She thought of the strange dreams she'd been having, the way local wildlife seemed unusually calm around her, the peculiar blue luminescence she'd noticed in the tide pools near the caves. Heavy footsteps echoed from the path outside. Maya killed the radio and the lights, pressing herself against the wall. Through a crack in the shutters, she saw figures in tactical gear, moving with practiced precision. They weren't here to negotiate. She grabbed the emergency pack she'd prepared weeks ago, her grandfather's journal, the research notes, and the small vial of water from the sacred spring that old Henrik had insisted she keep safe. Moving as quietly as possible, she slipped out the back door. The forest felt different in the darkness, alive with subtle sounds and movements. Maya had learned to read the island's moods, and tonight it seemed as agitated as she was. Branches caught at her clothes as she made her way toward the hidden cave system her grandfather had mapped in his journal. Behind her she heard the cottage door splinter. Harsh voices filled the night air, speaking in clipped professional tones. They were systematic, thorough. They would find her trail soon enough. The cave entrance was concealed behind a curtain of vines, nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Maya squeezed through the narrow opening, grateful for the flashlight in her pack. The tunnel stretched deep into the island's heart, carved by centuries of tidal action and something else. Her grandfather's notes had been vague about the original purpose of these chambers. As she descended, the walls began to glow with that same blue luminescence she'd noticed in the tide pools. The phenomenon was stronger here, more concentrated. Her skin tingled, and the baby moved restlessly. Whatever was down here, it was reacting to their presence. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber filled with pools of luminescent water. Maya had found it weeks ago, but had never ventured far inside. Now, with nowhere else to go, she pressed deeper into the cavern. A splash echoed from one of the pools. Maya froze, her flashlight beam trembling as it swept across the water. Something large moved beneath the surface. Sleek, intelligent, watching her with eyes that reflected an ancient wisdom. Her grandfather's final journal entry came flooding back. The guardianship is not just about protecting them from us, but about preparing for the day when we might need their protection. Maya will understand when the time comes. The child will be the bridge between 2 worlds. Voices echoed from the tunnel entrance. They'd found her trail. Maya looked at the creature in the pool, its luminescent skin pulsing with the same rhythm as her own heartbeat. The baby kicked hard, and for a moment she could swear she felt something responding, not just from the creature, but from the entire chamber, as if the island itself was awakening. She had a choice to make. She could try to run, to hide, to protect her grandfather's secret a little longer. Or she could trust in whatever transformation was beginning, whatever destiny had brought her to this moment. The voices grew closer, and Maya stepped toward the glowing pool. The compound was a fortress of concrete and steel carved into the island's northern cliffs, invisible from the sea and hidden beneath a canopy of twisted pines. Maya pressed herself against the rough bark of an ancient cedar, her heart hammering as armed guards patrolled the perimeter with military precision. The baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing her fear. 37 men, Finn whispered, lowering his binoculars. Professional mercenaries, not corporate security. They're here for war. Maya studied the facility through the scope of her grandfather's rifle. Satellite dishes crowned the main building, and generators hummed with barely contained power. This wasn't a temporary operation. They'd been planning this for months, maybe years. The realization that her grandfather had lived under this threat made her chest tight with anger. There, she breathed, spotting a familiar figure emerging from the central building. Director Harrison moved with the confident stride of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. Even from this distance, she could see the expensive cut of his tactical gear, the casual way he gestured to subordinates. This was his show. Dr. Chen appeared beside him, tablet in hand, pointing toward the southern slope where Maya knew the true entrance to the vault lay hidden. They'd found it. The thought sent ice through her veins. "We need to move now," Maya said. But Finn caught her arm. "Wait, look at the drilling equipment." Massive boring machines sat silent near the excavation site. Concrete barriers surrounded a gaping hole in the earth, and floodlights illuminated the depths. They'd broken through to the outer chamber, but the real vault would still be sealed. Her grandfather's encryption wouldn't yield its secrets easily. "They're stuck," Finn realized. "That's why they need you alive. The journal's useless without the bloodline key." Maya's hand instinctively went to the pendant at her throat, the final piece of her grandfather's elaborate puzzle. She'd decoded enough of his journal to understand that the vault required both the mathematical sequence and genetic verification. Her blood was literally the key to humanity's future. A radio crackled nearby, and they both froze. 2 guards approached their position, assault rifles ready. Maya held her breath, feeling the baby's movements still, as if even the child sensed danger. "Perimeter's clean," one guard reported. No sign of the woman. "Keep looking," came Harrison's voice through the static. "She's here somewhere. That boat didn't drift to shore by itself." The guards moved on, and Maya exhaled slowly. They had minutes, maybe less, before the search tightened. She studied the compound's layout, her mind racing through possibilities. The main entrance was suicide, but the service tunnels her grandfather had shown her in his sketches might provide another way. "There's a maintenance shaft on the eastern face," she told Finn. "It connects to the old mining tunnels. Grandfather used it during construction. That's a 40-foot climb down sheer rock. Then we'd better start moving." They crept through the forest, avoiding the patrol routes Maya had memorized. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made her flinch. The rifle's weight seemed enormous across her shoulders, but the weapon was their only insurance policy. The cliff face was worse than she'd remembered. Waves crashed against jagged rocks below, and the wind threatened to tear her fingers from the weathered handholds. Maya forced herself not to look down, focusing on each grip, each careful placement of her feet. The baby's weight threw off her balance, making every movement a calculated risk. Finn followed silently, his military training evident in the fluid way he navigated the treacherous descent. When they finally reached the maintenance shaft, Maya's arms trembled with exhaustion. The tunnel was a claustrophobic nightmare of rusted pipes and dripping condensation. Emergency lighting cast sickly green shadows on the walls. Maya pulled out her grandfather's journal, following his hand-drawn maps through the labyrinth. Each turn brought them deeper into the mountain's heart. "Motion sensors," Finn warned, pointing to blinking red lights along the ceiling. Maya checked the journal again. Her grandfather had anticipated this, marking the sensor locations with precise notations. They moved in careful patterns, avoiding the detection grid through timing and angles that seemed impossible until she saw them work. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber that took her breath away. The vault rose before them like a technological cathedral, its surface covered in symbols that seemed to shift in the artificial light. But the beautiful monument was violated now. Corporate drilling equipment surrounded its base, and cables snaked across the floor to banks of humming computers. Dr. Chen stood before the vault's main interface, her fingers flying across multiple keyboards. Screens displayed endless streams of code, all of it hitting the same barrier. The genetic lock held firm. 12 hours we've been at this, Chen muttered to a technician. The mathematical sequence is perfect, but without the bloodline verification, it's useless. Maya smiled grimly. Her grandfather's final gift was time, time she intended to use. The ancient chamber beneath the lighthouse felt like the earth's heartbeat made manifest. Maya pressed her hand against her swollen belly as another contraction rippled through her, stronger than the last. The baby was coming, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The timing is not coincidental, Elias said, his weathered face grim in the flickering light of their emergency lanterns. The island knows. It's been waiting. Above them, the sound of helicopters grew louder. Through the narrow ventilation shaft, Maya could see searchlights sweeping across the lighthouse grounds. The consortium had found them, just as her grandfather's journal had warned they would. "How long do we have?" she gasped, leaning against the stone wall carved with symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. "Not long enough," Thomas replied, his fingers flying over the complex mechanism at the center of the chamber. Ancient gears clicked and whirred as he worked to decode the final sequence. But maybe long enough. The mechanism was beautiful and terrifying, a crystalline structure that seemed to bend light around itself, connected to brass and copper components that hummed with energy. Maya's grandfather had spent decades understanding it, and now their lives depended on Thomas figuring it out in minutes. Another contraction seized her, and Maya bit back a scream. The baby was definitely coming now, whether she was ready or not. Elias moved to her side, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he helped her sit on the makeshift bedding they'd prepared. "Your grandfather delivered half the babies on this island," he said softly, "including yours truly, 63 years ago. I learned a thing or two watching him." The irony wasn't lost on Maya. She was about to give birth in the very place where her family's destiny had been forged generations ago. The chamber held the island's greatest secret, the reason the consortium had murdered her grandfather and hunted her across the ocean. "Got it!" Thomas shouted suddenly. The mechanism blazed to life, filling the chamber with light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The symbols on the walls responded, glowing brighter until the entire space thrummed with power. Through the ventilation shaft, Maya heard shouts of alarm from above. The consortium's soldiers had seen the light. "What happens now?" she asked, fighting through another wave of pain. "Now we find out if your grandfather was right," Thomas said, his face tight with concentration as he monitored the ancient controls. "The island's defenses are activating. But there's something else. The mechanism is responding to you specifically, to your presence here." Maya felt it too, a connection she couldn't explain, as if the island itself was reaching out to her. The baby moved restlessly inside her, and she wondered if her child could feel it as well. Explosions echoed from above as the consortium forces tried to breach the lighthouse. But something was wrong with their approach. Maya could hear confusion in their voices, panic creeping into their coordinated assault. "The island is fighting back," Elias said with grim satisfaction. "Just like it did during the war, when your great-grandfather first discovered this place." The light from the mechanism pulsed in rhythm with Maya's contractions, and she realized the connection ran deeper than she'd imagined. Her family hadn't just been guardians of the island's power, they were part of it, linked to it in ways that defied rational explanation. "I can see them," Thomas reported, peering through a periscope that emerged from the mechanism. 3 helicopters, but they're having trouble maintaining position. The island's electromagnetic field is interfering with their equipment. Maya gripped Elias's hand as another contraction peaked. She could feel the baby crowning, could sense her child's eagerness to enter this strange, dangerous world. Almost there, Elias encouraged. One more push. Above them, the sounds of the assault suddenly ceased. An eerie quiet settled over the island, broken only by Maya's labored breathing and the steady hum of the ancient mechanism. "They've withdrawn," Thomas said, disbelief in his voice. "All of them. The helicopters are pulling back." Maya felt a massive contraction building, different from the others. This was it. The moment everything would change. As she pushed with all her strength, the mechanism's light reached a crescendo, and she felt the island's power flowing through her like a river of starlight. Her daughter's first cry echoed through the chamber, a sound of pure life that seemed to resonate with the very stones around them. Maya cradled the tiny, perfect child against her chest, overwhelmed by love and the magnitude of what had just happened. The mechanism's light settled into a steady, warm glow, and Maya understood with crystal clarity what her grandfather had been trying to tell her in his encrypted journal. The island hadn't just been waiting for a guardian. It had been waiting for the next generation to be born within its protective embrace. Her daughter would inherit more than just the island. She would inherit its power, its secrets, and its sacred trust. Outside, dawn was breaking over the Pacific, and Maya knew their real journey was just beginning. Behind her, the sound of approaching footsteps made her turn. Elena emerged from the tree line, her weathered face creased with concern. "They're gone," she said simply. "All of them. The boats disappeared during the night." Maya nodded, unsurprised. After yesterday's confrontation, when the crystal had unleashed its power to protect the island, she knew Marcus Verne and his mercenaries wouldn't risk another direct assault. But she also knew they wouldn't give up entirely. "What happens now?" Elena asked, settling beside her on a fallen log. Maya opened the journal to the final page, where her grandfather's handwriting grew shaky with age and illness. He left instructions. "The crystal isn't just a source of power, it's a key, one of 7 scattered across the world." 7? Elena's eyes widened. "The consortium has been hunting them for decades. Grandfather's notes suggest that together they could reshape entire civilizations. But separated, they serve as guardians, protecting places of significance." Maya's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where her child grew steadily. "This island is more than our home, Elena. It's a sanctuary." The older woman was quiet for a long moment, watching the dolphins play in the distance. "Your grandfather was a good man, but he carried a heavy burden. I worried it would break him." It nearly did. Maya closed the journal and stood, feeling the crystal's energy flow through her like a gentle current. But he held on long enough to pass it to someone who could continue protecting this place. As they walked back toward the village, Maya noticed the changes that had occurred overnight. The island itself seemed more vibrant, more alive. The colors were richer, the air cleaner, and even the oldest buildings appeared somehow renewed. The crystal's awakening had healed more than just the immediate threat. In the village square, the remaining islanders gathered around them with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. These were the people who had chosen to stay, to trust in Maya's guardianship despite the danger it brought. Old Henrik stepped forward, his usual gruffness softened by gratitude. "The fish have returned to the eastern waters. First time in 5 years they've been that plentiful." Young Anna, barely 16, added excitedly, "And the fruit trees are blooming out of season. My grandmother says it's like the island is celebrating." Maya smiled, feeling the rightness of it all settle into her bones. This was what her grandfather had died protecting, not just an object of power, but a living ecosystem, a community, a future. "There will be others," she told the assembled group honestly. "The consortium won't give up, and there are other organizations that know about the crystal. We need to be prepared." "What do you propose?" asked Father Santos, the island's priest, who had arrived on the morning's supply boat just as the crisis ended. Maya had been thinking about this all night. We become invisible again. Officially, the island remains uninhabited except for a small research station studying marine biology. Elena, you'll be the official caretaker. The rest of us will be researchers or seasonal workers. And you? Elena asked. I'll be Dr. Maya Chen, marine biologist on extended sabbatical. My child will grow up thinking this is all perfectly normal. She paused, watching a pair of eagles circle overhead, until they're old enough to understand the truth. Over the following weeks, Maya worked to establish their new reality. She used her grandfather's extensive resources to create proper documentation, set up legitimate research grants, and even arranged for a small laboratory to be built on the island's eastern shore. To the outside world, they became exactly what they claimed to be. But in the evenings, when the tourists and supply boats were gone, Maya would walk the ancient paths her grandfather had shown her in dreams. The crystal responded to her touch like a living thing, sharing visions of the island's deep history and its connection to forces far older than human civilization. She learned to listen to the wind for whispers of approaching danger, to read the behavior of the seabirds for signs of unwelcome visitors. The island itself became her ally, her early warning system, her sanctuary. As autumn approached and her pregnancy advanced, Maya felt a deep sense of peace she hadn't expected. Yes, there would be challenges ahead. The consortium would regroup, other treasure hunters would come, and one day her child would have to decide whether to accept this inheritance. But for now, standing on her cliff at sunset with the crystal's warm weight in her palm and new life growing within her, Maya understood what her grandfather had truly left her. Not a burden, but a purpose. Not just survival, but the chance to nurture something precious and irreplaceable. The island was safe. Her family was safe. And somewhere in the distance, dolphins sang their ancient songs to the rising stars.